Hey, it's George. I'm back. So, episode 2. So I had intended on making this video a whole lot more exploratory of the subconscious and psychology. But as I started making notes, I found that I had been quite vulnerable in the first episode, but it felt like there was something missing. It felt like I needed to go a little bit deeper. There's one particular thing I want to share that opened this all up for me, and so I need to tell that story before we move on. So I was talking about freedom, and what I didn't tell you about that picture I had of the chains on my head was that as I was watching that picture, those chains, those links broke, and they just fell off in an instant. And you see, that's what happened for me. I've spoken about how I felt caged, I felt trapped, I felt constrained, I couldn't be myself. And part of finding that out was I actually signed up for Jordan Peterson's self-authoring course. And as I started to go through the questions of that course, it delves into basically, what do you think is wrong with you? Not in so many words, maybe not at that level, but it says specifically what situations, perhaps. Sorry, Jordan, if that's copyright or something like that, but this is relevant. So, each situation that I could think of that I had felt like I had operated less than I could have, or maybe not as well as I could have, each of those situations, when I broke it down, I found that it came back to one particular thing. It came back to me not wanting to, or not knowing who I was, not knowing what I actually wanted, and basing my decisions and basing those actions on the perceptions of others. So that was a real eye-opener for me, and that, when I mentioned the people-pleasing, that for me was like a key moment in seeing that actually there's something going on here, there's something that's constraining me, that's holding me back. To give you a bit of a backstory, I said that I was desperate in my last video, desperate to be free, desperate, I wanted to quit my job, but there was more to it than that. I found that I even wanted to move out of my flat, just sell all my stuff, sell the cars, get rid of bills, get rid of credit card debt, just be free of all of it. I thought that was what I was trying to be free of. For me, a large part of this was obviously in my head, and I don't talk about it a lot, but I had a bit of a drinking problem. Not in that I would get overly drunk or anything like that, but I found that I was self-medicating. I found that I thought too much, and so in drinking I would, just for those few moments, just for those few drinks, I would be free of that nagging voice. And interesting, looking into what alcohol does, alcohol actually separates your amygdala from your prefrontal cortex, so you end up not getting all the signals, not getting the fear, the inhibitions. They say alcohol kills your inhibitions. What are inhibitions? Inhibitions are the constraints you put on yourself around other people, the constraints you put on yourself to be presented perfect. And so that chain around my head, I used to drink to sort of get free of that. And it wasn't like, going out partying and getting smashed, but it was more like come home from work, need a drink just to get through the evening without thinking too much, get through the evening without feeling that bondage, feeling those chains around me, feeling so constrained. And so I think that for a lot of people, that can be why they drink. It certainly was medication on my part. And the very cool thing for me was that once this changed, once I was free of these constraints, that need just disappeared. There was one particular day I was driving home from work. It had been a really stressful day at work. Had a new boss, and he didn't seem to get me. We didn't click. I had, for a large part up until that time, been the one taking responsibility for things, being the one in our team. It was a small team of maybe 4 people, and being the oldest, being the senior, even though I wasn't really senior in the team, I took the lead. I took responsibility. I would do things like all the weekly numbers and statistics on the phone calls and emails and all that sort of thing. And he came along and he just wanted to throw that all out the window. And I found myself fighting to prove my value to him. And yeah, we clashed quite badly. I don't know why that was, but besides the point. But not only that, there was a girl I quite liked that I asked out, and she said no, she just wants to be friends, she's not interested in anything more. And part of that frustration was that I had thought I'd seen signals from her that she was quite keen, and maybe she had led me on a little bit, but I don't know. But anyway, I was driving home from work, and I remember quite clearly I'm sitting in my car on the Auckland Harbour Bridge. Traffic's moving slowly. I think it was a Friday afternoon, so traffic was really bad. And the song came on the radio, Adam Lambert, What Do You Want From Me? And I remember starting to sing along, what do you want from me? What do you want from me? And I just got louder and louder, and eventually I just cranked the radio up and I'm screaming it out. What do you want from me? What more do you want from me? You see, I was yelling that at God. I was yelling that at, I guess, this girl, my boss, and myself. Because that cage, those constraints that I placed on myself were for acceptance. They were to be accepted, to not be disapproved, to get validation, to get approval from people. And so, no matter what I did, I felt like I still couldn't get that acceptance. Now, part of my journey is that I thought, and I mentioned this, that being nice in my last video, I ramped up the niceness. I ramped up, okay, well, if they don't like me, I must just be more nice. And I found that that didn't work. And that was really, really frustrating. The reason I'm talking about that particular situation is because my flatmate, we've been talking a little bit about people pleasing and things like that. And he gave me a book to read. I read a book called The Disease to Please, and I'll put a link to that in the comments. But then he gave me this other book called Boundaries, written by 2 Christian doctors. And the first story in the book talks about this woman she's a mother, she's got a job, very involved in church, and she gets asked to do something by someone in the church, which is above and beyond her normal responsibilities. And then she gets asked to do something by her husband, and then she gets asked to do something by one of the teachers, and then she gets asked to do something by her boss. And she just has trouble saying no, and she just keeps on saying yes. But because she says yes too much, obviously she spreads herself way too thin and is unable to achieve any of the things well. She does all of them mediocre. But the point where everything changed for me. The point where those chains broke for me was when I was reading the last passage, or the last section of chapter 1 in this book. And it says how she's lying in bed and she cries out to God, "What more do you want? What more can I do?" And in that moment, it was like my whole life came into view. My whole life of that people pleasing, that trying to get approval, trying to feel accepted, was suddenly right in front of me. There's a term called a scotoma. Now, scotoma is a blind spot of the eye, obviously. But a scotoma can also be something that you have as a facility or a characteristic of yourself that you're not aware of. Everyone around you can see it, but you can't see it. And in talking to people about this later on, they said, yes, we could see that. It was obvious to us. It was obvious to us that you needed approval, that you needed acceptance, and that's all you were doing. But I couldn't see that. I didn't realize that I was doing that. And it can be so obvious to other people that they won't even bring it up. They won't even tell you about it. Or if they do tell you about it, you are so blinded to it that it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't even compute. It's like they're talking a different language. But in this moment, it became so obvious to me. And something shifted. Something changed, like instantly. And I can't describe it other than to say it was like my eyes were opened for the first time. There's that that comment in the Matrix, in the first Matrix movie, where Neo asks if when he's ready he'll be able to dodge bullets, and the response is, "No, Neo. When you're ready, you won't have to." And that's what it felt like to me. It felt like all my life I'd been striving and trying so hard and trying to do it by sheer force of will, trying to gain acceptance, trying to seek approval, trying to avoid disapproval. It was a sheer force of my will. Like, I'd been trying so hard. Everything in my life, everything was painted with this filter of needing acceptance. Everything was tainted. I'm going to use that word, tainted. Everything was tainted by the stink of desperation of that acceptance, of that need for acceptance. And in that moment, it all just broke. I didn't realize that it had changed for me, but I realized that I could see it in that moment. And the changes manifested themselves very quickly after that. And it wasn't things that I even noticed. That's how subtle it was. It wasn't like I'm like this and suddenly I'm like that. Like, I didn't even see the difference until later on, and it was pointed out to me. And I think that's significant because it shows that you can change without yourself knowing it. And it shows that a change can be a huge change without you consciously being aware of it. And this was the first instance, the first glimmer of hope, the first answer to the question I'd been asking myself for a little while. That question was, how do I get something from my head into my heart? Now, we talk about our heart and, I love someone with all of my heart. But what is our heart really? I believe it's your subconscious. And I know that I have known things consciously, logically, and I could work through it. But it would never settle where it became a part of me. It would never settle in my heart or my subconscious where I could act out of that thing. And I had seen it happen. I'd seen things where I believed something consciously, and when I thought it through, I knew the answer and I knew how something worked. But then, in the moment, it wasn't a part of me. And this gave me a clue that the subconscious and your conscious are two separate parts of your mind, I suppose is a way of putting it. And this change for me was so instant and so complete, but so unconscious, like it wasn't something I was aware of, that I got really excited by just how quickly we can change, by how completely we can change if the message goes into your subconscious instead of you're trying to force it in through your conscious mind. So I'll give you some examples of how that changed for me. There was that evening, I'd read that page on the book on a Wednesday, and that evening I went out, came home, and my flatmates were all at the neighbour's house. It was Diwali, and they had invited us round for some eats. And so we went round and we were all sitting around, and there was maybe 15 of us in their lounge, just standing around, and some sitting on the floor, some sitting on chairs, some of us standing. And there was a moment where at first we'd all been in our little groups, huddled up, talking to each other. So I was talking to my two flatmates, and the neighbours were talking to their friends, and we were all in these little groups. But somehow the dynamic of the situation changed. Somehow it got to a point where the one guy on the one side of the room was making a joke at another guy on the other side of the room, and everyone's attention turned, and suddenly it was a single group, a circle, and we were all looking very awkward. And I just jumped in with a suggestion for a game, and the game was 2 lies and 1 truth. That's not important, but I set up this game, and I ran this game in this group of people. We got upstairs, back to the flat a bit later on, and my flatmate just turns to me and he says, "What happened there?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "That game, and just taking on the whole group and leading that interaction and being quite happy to be the center of attention. What happened? How did that happen?" And I said, "I don't understand. I just did it." Like, to me, it wasn't out of the ordinary. It didn't feel like I was any different. It didn't feel like I had done anything different. I was just being myself. And so that's what I was saying. I didn't even notice it, but he had to point it out to me. He said, "Oh, well, this is clearly not you, that's not something you would have done before." And I had to reflect, and I think, wow, you're right. It was that moment earlier in the day that had changed for me, and that is why I'm so excited about this. It was just amazing to me that had happened. There was another instance. I was visiting a friend, and part of my sort of people-pleasing ways is I always had to be on time, and I never wanted to impose on people. So if I said I'd be somewhere, I'd be there maybe 5 to 10 minutes before, and I'd wait outside because I don't want to be early either. And in this instance, I'd been visiting a friend and was going on to visit another friend. And I just sent them a text and I said, "Hey, what's your address? I'll be there shortly." But I didn't set a time. In fact, I don't think I said I'd be there shortly. I think I said, "I'll be there when I'm done." Now, for me, that was not something I could have done before. I would need to set a specific time to be there. And so I just, again, I saw it later on. I thought, well, I could do that. I could tell someone, "I'll be there later. I'll be there when I'm done," and not have any anxiety to whether or not I'll get there at a time that's bad for them or anything like that. And so subtle was that change as well, that it wasn't something that I felt was any different. I didn't feel any different. And so that is what led me on this journey of saying, okay, if we can make little tweaks to our subconscious that have such a big impact in our lives, isn't that better than trying to force ourselves to do things? It was also that moment that changed drinking for me, where I didn't need to drink anymore. And I only noticed that later as well, like I didn't feel the need to have that afternoon drink when I got home, to stop thinking so much, or to drop my inhibitions, or to feel free. And so, yeah, that is the start. That was what got me looking into the subconscious and looking at to how can something so small make such a big difference? How can such a small little epiphany, a little change? It wasn't anything I did. It wasn't anything I had to force into myself. I didn't, it wasn't like, oh, you have to have a habit. You need to do this 21 times in a row in order to form this habit. It wasn't anything like that. It was just seeing differently. It was just one little extra piece of information. That moment, it changed everything. I had been crippled by that need for approval. Absolutely crippled. And in that moment, it all just broke away, and I was suddenly free. And what I want to tell you is that there's hope. There's hope because it's not difficult. It's not all this work we have to put in. It's not forming those habits. It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be such a struggle. You just need the right key in the right place, that right piece of information, and everything can change for you. That is really important, and I'm going to go into that. I'm going to look at just why that is, and just how you can identify that key, that piece of information for you that opens everything up. It just changes your world. In Christianity, we have a term called a revelation, and a revelation in that terminology is a message from God that we haven't seen before. But I'm going to use that word revelation as the moment you get a lesson, or the moment you understand something and it moves from your conscious mind to your subconscious and becomes a part of you. A revelation is like a software update. It's like you were operating on this version and suddenly you're now operating on a new version of software. The hardware is fine. And that's what I meant by you're not broken. You see, I don't think that it's necessarily anything wrong. It's not something that's fundamentally broken. It's not something that's unfixable. And it's not something that's difficult to fix. All it is having the correct information. All it is injecting the correct information into the subconscious, or removing past lessons that maybe don't serve you anymore, past lessons that were based on a different paradigm, were based on things that no longer apply to you. I think that our head knowledge is what we know in our conscious mind, and our heart knowledge is what we learn in our subconscious. And so the subconscious is what runs your life when you're not thinking about it. The subconscious is the sum of all your fears, all your dreams, all your memories. And it has access to all of that without you even knowing. It has access to all the lessons you've learned throughout your life. All the lessons on how you need to be around people, how you need to act around people, how you need to protect yourself. And you can change it in that moment. You can change it by just unlocking that key, which will be different for each and every one of us. But that's why it's so important to be self-aware. It's so important to self-reflect. It's so important to spend the time trying to understand why you are the way you are. And not just at a physical level, not just at a conscious level, but at a subconscious level. We need to look at our stories. We need to look at those things in the past that have brought us to where we are now. Those things in the past that maybe have hurt us or taught us those lessons. We need to consider and process those things and come to terms with them. I've got an exercise which I'm going to share with you in the next video on how you can release or break off those old lessons that no longer work for you. And I'm really excited about this because it works and it can help you to come to terms. It can help you to upgrade your software. It can help you to break free of those things that have held you back, have caused you trauma, caused you pain, caused you anxiety. So, thank you for joining me in this video. This one has been a little bit more of a challenge for me because my mind was racing ahead to all different ideas. And yeah, I look forward to talking more about this. Please, once again, if you found value in this, share it with your friends, share it with someone you think could benefit from this. Thank you. Goodbye.